Welcome to Slaying Excel Dragons video number 25. Hey, these are the videos that accompany this book, and we're still talking about the epic Chapter 5 formulas and functions. Now, we got a great video here. We're going to talk about and or criteria, and or. Well, we've already seen two criteria, summing and counting, but now we want to distinguish between an and logical test and an or. And in the process, we will see how to use this sort of criteria for adding, counting, and averaging a bunch of things, a bunch of cool functions in this video. All right, let's go over to our Excel workbook. We're in the Excel workbook, excelisfun Start. You can download that from the link below the video. And we're going to start on Functions 2 worksheet. Now, last video, we were already on this sheet, and we actually did define names. If I click in this cell and hit F2, you can see, oh, max function we looked at, min and COUNTIF, but we use define names. Totally convenient when you're using the same column or data set over and over and over. We're going to continue using define names in this video, but we're going to talk about two criteria, an and an or. Now, last video, we did this define name. And I actually want to show you. I did it in the book, but I didn't do it here. What happens if I just change this sale right here at the top to 5,000? If that range right there, which is a defined name, is looking there, it'll now deliver 5,000. And sure enough, it does. Sales, looking there. All right, sales counter, min counter. Now let's look at SUMIFS. All right, now we've already seen this so far a couple times in the book. We used it for one criteria. We did have one example a couple of videos ago with two, but now we want to talk explicitly about two criteria. So here's our criteria. We want to add. Sue is the sales representative, and we want to add only the sales for customer PCC. So let's see how to do that. There's the sales column. There's the customer. I'm sorry, sales rep, customer, and sales. Those are the three separate columns we're going to have to use. Equals SUMIFS. Now, we talked about this before. Totally easy to follow these screen tips and the arguments. Sum range, well, that's going to be sales. So I'm going to type S, and just as we did in our last video, we saw the define names are in the dropdown. So when I get the name I want, tab, comma, criteria range, it is sales representative. Now, I'm not going to type out sales R and tab. I'm just going to hit S once and then down arrow tab. There's the criteria range 1. Now, comma, and the criteria 1, well, that's going to be Sue. So I'm going to down arrow, comma, criteria range 2. Well, this is the customer, so I'm going to type CUS tab, comma, and then arrow, arrow. So there we have our formula. Whoops. This is the only one that is going to be used for adding. But when we get a true here and a true here, meaning the criteria is matched, we are going to get the corresponding number here and add. Now, I want to explicitly go and look how this and criteria is working. All right, so the answer is 3,200. So Sue sold $3,201 to the customer PCC. Let's go over here. Here's how it works. Literally, this function in a split second looks all the way through this gigantic column, all the way through this one and this one. And here's how it does it. It goes, is this the first record? The item in sales rep column, is it equal to Sue? If it is, it says true. If it's not, it says false. So false. This is false also, but that doesn't matter. As soon as it sees one false, forget it. It goes to the next one. Is Galt equal to Sue? No, false. Is Sue equal to Sue? True. Is PCC equal to the second criteria? True. Only when it gets a true and a true, both logical tests are met, both criteria are found in a single record, does it jump over here and then it puts it into memory. It continues down the column. True, but this is false. Because there's not two trues, it's not getting that. Ding, ding, ding. It keeps going down here. It finally, no. I think there's another one down here, too. OK, so then finally, true, true. It's allowed to go over and get this and put it in memory. So that's what it does when it's got and criteria. For any particular record, two trues means it can add. Another way to look at this is there's a column filled with false, false, true, false, true. Here it would be false, false, true, false, false. Anytime it finds corresponding to truths, it jumps over. And that particular way of looking at it will come in handy later when we do the sum product function, which is a very important function. All right. Now let's go on, and we're going to do COUNTIFs now. And up here we did summing. Here we're going to do counting. Now look at this. We're going to do AND criteria, but it's only going to look through one column. With the SUMIFs, it looked through two different columns for criteria and a third column for adding. But COUNTIFs, it's going to look through two criteria through one column. And here's how it works. Greater than or equal to 1,000 and less than 1,500. Both must be true for us to count the record. So here's what it does. It comes over to the single column and says, is this greater than or equal to 1,000? True. Is it less than or less than 1,500? True. Only when it gets two trues does it add. False, because it's below, false. Here it gets a true, true, so it adds. Now notice there's something unusual about this AND criteria as compared to this. This also going to be thought of as a between criteria. So we're setting up categories where we're saying always between these two numbers. Something very important to note here, and actually this is the first time we've seen between criteria, and we'll see it about 5 to 10 other times in the rest of the book when we're talking about frequency function, when we're talking about sum product function, when we're talking about advanced filter, pivot tables, all do between criteria. The equal sign is here, but not here. Now that's very important when you set up categories so that you don't double count. Now, I'll come back to that idea in just a moment, but let's go ahead and calculate our COUNTIFs. Remember, this is an AND criteria, or in our particular case, between criteria. Equals COUNTIFs. Oops, I did COUNTIF, but I really wanted an S for more than one criteria, so I'm going to backspace S tab. Criteria range 1, I'm going to type S tab, comma, and the criteria, let me move this up here, down arrow, comma, criteria range 2, S tab, comma, criteria 2, down, down. Now, notice something interesting about this. We have seen an example already in this book where we had comparative operators. These are comparative operators greater than or equal to, and this one's less than. But in that earlier example, that was in the video where we did all the formula elements. We actually put the comparative operators in the formula. Now here, we didn't do that. I will do that exact example that we did earlier in the book down here. But the reason that we didn't do that here is because we're not going to use this 1,000 for any other formula inputs. So I don't want to waste the time typing the formula. It's easier to type it out in the cell. Notice something else. These cell content items are aligned to the left, not to the right like a number. So Excel is thinking it's text, which is actually perfect for criteria anytime you have a criteria argument in either in SUMIF, COUNTIF, or AVERAGEIF. All right, OK, let's see if this works. And there it is, 26. One other thing about the comparative operators, and we talked about this earlier, there's no such thing as a greater than or equal to single symbol. So you always have to type it out 2 with the equal sign coming second. All right, so now I would like to do another example down here. But instead, I would like to do different categories. I'm going to do the category directly below this. This is between 1,000 and 1,500. So now I'm going to do between 500 and 1,000. Now, here's why it's so important to have an equal sign on one side, but not the other. Remember, this is the lower limit for our category. This is the upper limit. Lower, upper limit. So in order to not double count, we're going to do the same thing here. Greater than, equal to. Notice the lower limit has the equal sign, so I put it here. Enter. And now I'm going to put the less than symbol here. Whoops. Now, what's so nice about that is we're not double counting. The 1,000 gets counted in this category, but not here. And that is a great way to set it up. Now, later when we learn VLOOKUP and other VLOOKUP for it's a function with categories. When we do our frequency tables with formulas, we're always going to have the equal sign here. But that's not always the case. Sometimes people put it on the upper side. So for example, if you decide to put it here, which, for example, the frequency function does, and pivot tables when grouping does, you got to be consistent. So if you put it on the upper, you always got to put it on the upper. Very important to get your categories correct with between criteria when you are doing comparative operators and creating your categories like this. I'm going to Control Z, 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 Z. All right, now let's see how to do this a slightly different way. I'm going to assume that these numbers that I've entered in the cell are going to be used somewhere else, like we saw in our earlier example in the book when we did a label and a formula for counting. We used these formula inputs in that earlier example in other formulas. So in that case, it's better to not put the comparative operator in the cell, but put them in the formulas. So we're going to try that here. COUNTIFs, the criteria range, well, it's still sales, comma. There's my move cursor. I'm going to move it right there like that. Criteria 1, I have to put greater than or equal to in double quotes and use the ampersand. That's the join symbol, and join it to this cell right here. If you highlight this and hit F9, you can see, sure enough, it is altogether considered one piece of criteria. Notice also, we learned earlier that anything in a formula that's considered text is in double quotes. Notice up here, aligned to the left, so that means it's text. Boom, it knows that that's text. Control Z. Actually, that's true anytime you use the ampersand to join. That's our criteria there. Then comma, the criteria range 2, S tab, comma, and then we need less than in double quotes, and then ampersand down arrow. Now, I'm trying to hit my down arrow to get my cell reference, and what happened? Well, if you look over here, it's in edit mode because I'm typing. So to get out of edit mode, hit F2. Watch this. When I hit F2, it gets to enter, and now my down arrow can search for cell references. All right. That is an alternative way. And always the deciding rule is, if you're ever going to use this in any other formulas, then hard code them in like this. Otherwise, forget it. If you're never going to use that 1,000 and that 1,500 in other formulas, just put them in the cells like that. 0. We must have done something wrong, or there are no sales between 500 and 1,000. Now, let's see. Can I already find an example? There's one right there. So I know there's something wrong with my formula. I'm going to hit F2. There it is. I put a comma. So instead of less than, I forgot to hit Shift. OK, so what do we do there? I went immediately and looked for an example to prove that it wasn't really 0. If I couldn't find any, maybe it was 0. But then I looked at the formula, found the problem, and boom, 30. All right. And criteria, looking through multiple columns, and criteria that also happens to be between, because we're counting between two numbers, looking through one column. Let's do AVERAGEIFS now. AVERAGEIFS, same as COUNTIFs and SUMIFS, we can have more than one criteria. Equals average. And notice the if, that's with one criteria, or the ifs. And you know what? If you're always using Excel 2007 and 10, you can just always use the s's, because the s functions can take one or more criteria. And actually, the screen tips for helping you figure out what to put in are more polite in the s versions than some of the if without an s version. All right, I'm going to click that. All right, our average range is going to be the sales column, but we have a Bellin, which is a product. So we're looking through the product column, and region. All right, S tab, that's the average range, comma. The product I need for criteria 1, so I'm going to type PRO. And look at this. There's all sorts of PROs, including a function. Right? So you got to be careful here. I'm going to down arrow tab, comma, and then the criteria right there. Criteria 1 is going to be the Bellin boomerang, comma. Criteria range 2 is going to be region, R-E-G, tab, comma, and then down arrow to get my west. And there we have it. Column with numbers, criteria, column, criteria, criteria, column, criteria. And there's our average. Now, these are all and. 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning 2 trues have to exist for an item to be counted, summed, or concluded in the average. We now want to switch gears and look at OR criteria. Now, let's just think about this. If we want to add all of the sales for West or Midwest, how would we do that if we were doing it by hand? Well, let's go look at our columns. Okay, so I'm going to, here's the sales column. So that's the column I'm getting numbers from to add. But region, oh, wait a second. West and Midwest are both in the region column. We're not looking through, we have 2 criteria. And not only that, when you, unlike our numbers when we were doing between criteria, both criteria applied to one number. And we could get a true, true for both. But watch this. Let's just ask the question. Is this equal to West? True. Is this equal to Midwest? False. And guess what? This is never going to be both. So it's impossible to get 2 trues. This is an OR criteria, which means we're only going to need 1 true in order to get a true for this record to be counted. So here's how it's going to work. Is this equal to West? True. Is this equal to Midwest? False. Now, actually, it won't do that. As soon as it sees a true, it says, OK, that's once counted. Here it says, is this equal to West? False. Is this equal to Midwest? True. Goes all the way down. Here it gets 2 falses. True, true, 2 falses. I'm sorry, I should have said true, false, 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 true. All right, that's OR criteria. Only one has to be true in order for the record to be counted. Now, how in the world are we going to do that? Because when up here, AVERAGEIFS and the COUNTIFs and SUMIFS, these were all and. Both of them had to be true. So we can't use like equals SUMIFS and then change some option to say OR. Guess what? Because we're always either going to get a true or false and never 2 trues, we can just use 2 SUMIFs and add them. All right, now in the book I show you SUMIFs. You can also, for this one, since there's only a single criteria, you can use SUMIF. Same with this example down here. COUNTIF works fine. And actually, I have the examples over to the side here. But I'm going to use the S's just because I like how polite the screen tips are. All right, so you ready? The sum range. Well, it's S tab, comma, criteria range 1. Well, we're doing region, so R-E-G, comma, and criteria 1, down arrow. It's not working, so I'm going to hit F2 and then down arrow. All right, so I'm going to close parenthesis, and that's it. But watch this. Because I'm always going to get either only 1 true, never 2, I can copy and simply add. And Control V. I just pasted it. Now, that one won't work, but I can double-click that and click on the Midwest. The only reason we can get away with adding 2 SUMIFs is because this is OR criteria. And for any record, we're never going to get 2 trues. All right? And that's it. That will work. All right, let's do the same thing for COUNTIFs. We're going to count. Summing, counting, equals COUNTIFs. The criteria range. Oh, yeah, we are simply counting, so we don't need the sum range. Region, comma, down arrow. When I did the comma, I got to criteria 1. Close parentheses. And then I'm just going to type this one out. Plus COUNTIFs. Criteria range, R-E-G tab, comma, down arrow. Close parentheses. Same thing, because we're never going to get 2 trues for any one given record. We can just add. Anytime it, well, anyway, so then we can do it. Control Enter. 48. Let's just scroll over here. And actually, throughout the book, if you're reading the book, every time I encounter a formula like COUNTIFs or AVERAGEIFS that doesn't exist in earlier versions, and these two formulas that I did here, I always have in the book, there's a printed example of a formula that will work in earlier versions. Similarly, or it's printed in the book, and it always says, now go look at sheet so-and-so. So here, there is the example of how to do the SUMIF for OR. There's the example of how to do the COUNTIF. And ooh, look at that one. And what's that one for? That's the AVERAGEIF. Ooh, in earlier versions, it was much harder to do an AVERAGEIFs with multiple criteria. And there it is. We'll actually talk about SUMPRODUCT in our next video. There's some great uses for SUMPRODUCT. All right, now let's do average. So here we did, and this is going to be an OR criteria. So I'll scroll down just a little bit. Maybe I'm going to Control B to make that bold. Now, guess what? I've already calculated the total for these two criteria. And I've already counted with the two OR criteria. So now I can simply say equals this divided by this. And boom. Now, if you didn't have enough room in your spreadsheet, and you really only wanted the average with these two OR criteria, what would you do? Well, you'd have to, in essence, take all of that stuff from that cell and put it right where this K6 is. And then you'd have to take all of that stuff from this cell and put it right where that K9 is. So actually, I'm going to show you how to do that, because it's not hard, and it's common to build formulas in steps like this. Because putting together some big formulas is oftentimes really hard. But making them in steps like this is nice and easy. So put it into edit mode and copy in edit mode. Escape. I'm going to come right here and type equals Control V. Now, wait a second. Look at that. That's a plus. Escape. Oops, I didn't mean to escape. Equals Control V. Enter. I'm going to increase the column width. Oh, we're doing division. So everything here has to be one single number. So when I come over here, plus, in accordance with the order of operations, would be done second. So we're actually going to have to slap all of this in parentheses, right? And then we'll do a division and put the numerator. But I'm going to enter this, go up and copy this. In edit mode, Control C, escape, F2, division, open parentheses, Control V, close parentheses. Oh, that's a big formula there. Now, the cool thing about the way we did it step 1, step 2. Then you could copy and paste and make it all together. That way, when someone looks at your spreadsheet, they'll be like, wow, he just typed that out. That's amazing. All right, one last topic for this video. Sometimes you want to build a what's called a frequency table. We want to count. And we just want to count how many sales we had in the West, the Midwest, the South. Well, this is only one criteria, right? So we can use the COUNTIF or the COUNTIFs. I'm going to use the COUNTIF here. And the cool thing is we've created defined names. So our defined name is REG, bad typer, REG, tab. And guess what? Defined names by default are absolute. Now, you can change that in the name manager, but very rarely is that ever warranted. So this is by default absolute, so we don't even have to lock it, comma. Another great advantage of defined names. The criteria, that one right there, one cell to my left. I close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. Click in the last cell and F2. Absolutely beautiful. Works like a charm. All right, so we saw a lot in this video. Definitely AND criteria where we get 2 trues. Between an AND criteria where we get 2 trues also in order for it to be counted or summed. And don't forget when you're making the categories to make sure that you have an equal sign on one of the numbers and be consistent. We saw how to hard code the comparative operators in the formula or not. We saw how to do AVERAGEIFS, and we even saw how to do OR criteria for summing, counting, and averaging. And finally, a little frequency table. All right, we'll see you next video for SUMPRODUCT function. See you next video.